When you think of America's founding, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's the Declaration of Independence, right? It's this huge symbol of liberty, kind of like the nation's original mission statement.
Yeah, everyone knows the big lines: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We hold it up as America's birth certificate, this super bold, crystal clear statement that just created a new country.
But here's a wild thought. What if the document we all know and love is actually a compromise? What if one of its most powerful, maybe even world-changing passages was just deleted at the very last second? Well, that's exactly the story we're going to get into. So to really get why this happened, we have to ask a different question first. Who was the Declaration actually for? And the answer? It's probably not who you think. It wasn't written for the king, or even for the colonists themselves. Nope, it was for the whole world. Seriously, the Declaration wasn't a law. It couldn't put anyone in jail or grant any rights. Think of it more like a global press release. It was a piece of propaganda, an advertisement really, designed to justify this huge break from Britain on the world stage. It was basically a message to other big players, especially France, saying, hey, look at us, we're for real, we're organized, and we are open for business and alliances. And that right there is the key. You could almost call it a declaration of interdependence. I mean, let's be real. The colonists were massively outgunned by the British Empire. They were desperate for cash, weapons, and powerful friends. So this document was their formal application to join the Club of Nations. It was a super smart, strategic play to turn what looked like a messy civil war into a legitimate international conflict. Okay, and this is where the plot really thickens. Because inside Thomas Jefferson's original draft, there was this one section, a passage so explosive, so controversial, that it had to be completely cut just to make that whole global announcement work. So Jefferson, who was tasked with writing the thing, put in this really fiery grievance against King George III. But when the draft got to the Continental Congress for review, this one part, man, it caused the biggest fight they had. And just look at the language Jefferson used here. I mean, wow. He goes right for the throat, calling the slave trade a cruel war against human nature itself. He blames the king personally for creating and protecting this horrible market where men should be bought and sold. It is an absolutely stunning, direct takedown of the whole system. So the million-dollar question is, why would they take this out? I mean, it's such a powerful moral statement. Why cut it? Well, the answer comes down to cold, hard political reality. It all came down to one word: unity. The whole revolution was hanging by a thread. This coalition of 13 very different colonies was incredibly fragile. And at that moment, keeping everyone on the same team was just more important than taking a public stand against slavery. And this slide just lays it all out so clearly. Look at the difference. On the left, Jefferson's draft is this sledgehammer attack on the slave trade. But the final version, it gets watered down to this super vague phrase about the king stirring up domestic insurrections, which was, a coded reference to slave revolts. It completely flips the blame. So who wanted it gone? Well, it was a coalition of its own. First, you had the delegates from the Deep South, South Carolina and Georgia, where the entire economy was built on slavery. But, and this is so important, they weren't the only ones. You also had delegates from the North, guys who represented merchants and ship captains who were getting rich from the slave trade. So it was this ugly compromise, basically, born from a shared economic interest in keeping slavery going. So when you know all this, it kind of forces you to look at the Declaration in a whole new light. It wasn't really a legal document that created a new reality on the spot. It was more of an ideological one, one that created a new promise. Yeah, and that's a mistake a lot of people make. You can't actually go to court and sue somebody based on the Declaration of Independence. It's not a legal text. It's got immense philosophical and rhetorical power, for sure, but it isn't law. The documents that became legally binding are the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You could say the Declaration states the why, and the Constitution builds the how. Maybe the best way to understand its power comes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He had this incredible way of putting it. He called the Declaration a promissory note. Basically an IOU, a promise of liberty and equality that the nation hadn't cashed yet, but one that it was forever obligated to try and make good on.
And man, has that promise echoed through history. Just look at this. In 1848, women's rights pioneers at Seneca Falls basically copied its structure for their own Declaration of Sentiments. Then you have Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, framing the entire Civil War as a fight to finally live up to that promise of equality. It even inspired revolutionaries across the globe, like Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. The words themselves became a weapon for justice, used by anyone, anywhere, fighting for freedom.
So, knowing this secret history, this really difficult compromise at the very beginning, it changes things, doesn't it? It shows us that the United States was born with this deep, fundamental contradiction right at its heart. And that leaves us with a really tough, really important question. When we hear those famous words, all men are created equal, how does it change things for you, knowing that a powerful condemnation of slavery was intentionally scrubbed from that very same document to get it passed? It's a question that reframes the whole American story. It turns what seems like a simple statement of truth into what it's always been, a complex and very much ongoing struggle.